Chapter 1. The envelopes hit the conference table like 3 small grenades. Nobody ducked. Nobody flinched. Ronan kept his eyes on the shipping manifest in front of him. Tavrik lifted his espresso cup with the particular elegance of a man who had never once in his life been caught off guard. Kellen, seated at the far end, slowly set down the cloth he'd been using to wipe something dark and rust-colored from his right knuckle. I stood at the head of their table in my best charcoal suit, the one I'd bought specifically because Ronan once said it made me look like I belonged in a boardroom. Today, I needed to look like I belonged in a courtroom. "Congratulations," I said. "All 3 of you are getting exactly what every married man secretly wants." Tavrik finally looked up. "A divorce." The word landed differently than I expected. Not like a grenade. More like the moment after one goes off, when the smoke is still settling and nobody has decided yet whether to run. Tavrik set his espresso down with a small, careful click. "You're joking. There are signatures inside each envelope," I said. "Mine. Notarized. Dated yesterday." Ronan picked up his envelope. He didn't open it immediately. He turned it over once, the way he handled every unfamiliar object, like he was checking for traps. Then he broke the seal with his thumb and pulled out the first page. The room was quiet enough that I could hear the paper. Kellen had not moved. "What happened?" Ronan said. Not a question. Ronan Vare did not ask questions the way ordinary people did. He issued them like directives. 3 years of marriage happened, I said. "That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting right now." Ronan looked up from the page. His expression was what people who didn't know him might describe as calm. People who did know him understood that his calm was not the absence of something. It was the management of it. "Soren. Ronan. I'm not signing this." I laughed. It came out sharp and a little too bright, the way my laughs always did when I was actually furious. "I didn't ask you to sign it. I asked my attorney to file it. Your signature is optional. The outcome is not." Tavrik stood up slowly. He was smiling, which meant nothing good. Tavrik's smile was a separate organism from the rest of his face. It appeared during contract negotiations, during interrogations, and apparently during divorce proceedings. "Baby," he said, "don't. You drove 40 minutes from the east side to hand us paper when you could have texted. I wanted to see your faces. And are our faces satisfying your revenge fantasy?" "Tavrik," Ronan said quietly. Tavrik sat back down. I kept my eyes on all 3 of them because that was the only way to watch 3 separate men simultaneously recalibrate. Ronan was reading. Tavrik was performing stillness. Kellen had said nothing, which meant Kellen was doing the most dangerous thing any of them could do. Kellen was thinking. I noticed his phone face down on the table vibrate twice. He didn't look at it. He looked at me. I noticed Ronan glance once toward the door, a movement so brief most people would have missed it. I had spent 3 years studying these men. I did not miss it. "You're upset," Tavrik offered. "Thank you, Tavrik. Stunning observation. Have you considered a career in therapy? We can discuss whatever this is." "This," I said, pointing at the envelopes, "is not whatever. This is a legal document that my attorney has already submitted to the courts. This is me telling you that I have made a decision." The discussion portion of this marriage concluded at approximately 11:45 last night. Ronan set the paper down. "You're not leaving. Watch me. Soren." His voice dropped to the register he used when he was done negotiating. "You are not leaving this building until we talk. I walked in here on my own. I'll walk out the same way." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Kellen. Something passed between them, wordless and fast, the kind of communication that came from sharing a womb and 32 years of survival. Kellen reached into his jacket pocket. I thought he was reaching for his phone. He pressed a single button on a small flat device I had never seen before. The sound was almost musical, a low mechanical hum that traveled through the floor, up through my shoes, and settled somewhere behind my sternum. The lights above the elevator bay shifted from white to a deep, steady amber. I heard the stairwell doors at both ends of the corridor engage. Not slam. engage with the particular finality of reinforced steel finding its seat. My phone showed full signal for exactly 4 more seconds. Then nothing. I turned back to face them. "Oh, fantastic," I said. "Divorce apparently comes with complimentary kidnapping." None of them laughed. I walked to the nearest stairwell door and pressed the handle. It did not move. I tried the secondary exit at the far end of the room. Sealed. I returned to the table, placed both hands flat on the surface, and looked directly at Ronan. "Open it." "I can't." "You own the building." "That's exactly why I can't." I stared at him. His face had changed in a way I had no immediate category for. The management was gone. Underneath it was something I had only seen on Ronan Vare once before, at a hospital 2 years ago when he thought I was unconscious and didn't know I was watching him. Fear. "Someone entered this building," he said, "carrying a suppressed rifle. 8 minutes before you walked into this room." The air left my lungs in a slow, silent rush. Kellen rose from his chair and moved to the corridor entrance, his hand already inside his jacket. He looked back at me once. "We didn't lock you in," Ronan said. Kellen's voice, low and even and absolutely without comfort, filled the silence. "We locked him in with us." Chapter 2. 40 minutes before Kellen pressed that button, I was standing inside Ronan's private office with my hands shaking and my stomach somewhere on the floor. I want to be precise about this. I was not snooping. That word implies I did something small and petty, rifling through drawers for leverage or ammunition. What I was doing was retrieving the original mating and marriage contracts, which had my signature on them, which I was legally entitled to possess, which Ronan had never once offered to give me a copy of in 3 years. I needed them for my attorney. That is not snooping. That is basic administrative responsibility. The cufflink was on the edge of the desk. I would not have touched it except that I knocked it onto the floor reaching past a folder, and when I picked it up, the psychometry hit me before I could set it down. My ability does not ask permission. It never has. It functions like walking barefoot into a dark room and stepping directly onto something that punctures skin. The vision begins before the pain registers. The first image, concrete. A floor stained in wide dark arcs, the kind of pattern that results from volume, not accident. The smell inside the vision was copper and mildew and something chemical underneath both. A sound. Someone crying with the specific quality of a person who has been crying so long they no longer produce tears, only the movement of it, the terrible mechanical repetition of grief without moisture. Then I saw the Omega. Younger than me. Wrists bound with chain, not rope, chain with small industrial links, and he was pressed against a support column trying to make himself smaller than the structure allowed. His designation scent was saturated with terror, the kind that overrides suppressants completely, the kind that reads in the air like a flare. Kellen appeared in the frame of the vision. He was holding a gun, not raised, not lowered, held with the flat competence of a man for whom a weapon in his hand is no more remarkable than a pen. He was looking at something outside my line of sight. Tavrick's voice from somewhere behind the image. Low, deliberate, directed at someone I couldn't identify. "The Marcello family wants a clean exit. We give them one." Then Ronan, standing at a distance, phone against his ear, and he said to whoever was on the line, "Clean the building before the investigators arrive. Everything." Then Tavrick again, closer now, and this time I heard it completely. "Soren can never know about this." The vision broke. I was on my knees on the office floor with the cufflink still in my closed fist and something acrid rising in my throat. I made it to Ronan's private bathroom with approximately 2 seconds to spare. Afterward, I sat on the cold tile and pressed my back against the cabinet beneath the sink and breathed through my nose until my vision stabilized. My psychometry leaves physical damage behind. Nosebleeds, headaches, a tremor in my hands that takes 20 minutes to stop. This one left me with all 3 simultaneously. Here is the part that mattered. I did not know if the young Omega in that vision was alive. I did not know what Ronan ordered cleaned. I did not know what Tavrick's clean exit meant. I knew only what I had seen. Kellen, a gun, a terrified Omega in chains, Ronan standing beside what I interpreted as a body, and Tavrik saying my name in the context of permanent ignorance. I went back into the office. I cannot explain the next part of my behavior as anything other than the logical conclusion of loving men who had withheld information from me for 3 years. I searched. I found a manila folder behind a false backing in the lower drawer, the one Ronan thought I didn't know existed because I had discovered it 18 months ago by accident and chosen to respect his privacy. Today, his privacy could wait. Inside, a warehouse address encoded in a business format but readable to anyone who'd spent enough time watching these three operate. Several photographs. A missing persons document with a name and designation printed at the top. Payment records flowing between shell companies I didn't recognize. I photographed everything on my phone. Then I walked to the conference room. Now, standing inside the lockdown with the elevator lights amber and the stairwells sealed, I processed what the controlled terror on Ronan's face actually meant. He was not afraid of the divorce. He was afraid for me. Specifically, immediately, and in a way that bypassed every layer of composure he had spent 3 decades constructing. I watched Kellen move through the corridor with the economical precision of a man mapping threat vectors in real time. His hands, which the vision had shown me wrapped around a weapon above a chained omega, were now positioned to place themselves between me and anything that moved wrong. I had spent the last 40 minutes deciding these men were capable of something unforgivable. I had not spent nearly enough time considering that what I saw and what I understood were 2 different things. But I was not ready to surrender that distinction yet. Because loving someone is not evidence. And I had learned, in 3 years inside this marriage, that the Vare brothers were capable of being entirely honest about their feelings while being comprehensively dishonest about everything else. Security footage appeared on the wall screen. Grainy. Timestamp. 44 minutes ago. A figure entering the building through a service entrance. The feed cut out before the face appeared. Tavrik said, quietly and without his usual performance. He knows where every blind spot is. The security chief turned from the screen. There's another problem. He pulled up a second feed. An empty room. A weapons locker standing open. One of your personal bodyguards is missing, he said. And his locker has been cleared. Chapter 3. I have a personal policy about being told to stay in one room. It has never worked. Not once in my life, not in childhood. Not in 3 years of marriage to men whose organizational capacity for controlling their environment was frankly impressive. The policy, for anyone keeping track, is that I do not stay in one room. Kellen blocked the doorway. He is 6'4" and built in a way that suggests the word doorway was invented specifically to contain him. He stood with his arms at his sides, which sounds passive until you understand that Kellen Vare's stillness is not the absence of movement. It is movement that has decided to wait. Soren, he said. I'm going to look at the locker room, I said. You're going to stay here. Kellen, I understand you have a job to do, and I respect the commitment. I genuinely do, but I need you to move. I'm not moving. If you're planning to physically stop me, I should warn you that I bite. He looked at me. I know. I immediately regretted saying that, because his expression did something complicated and I did not have the emotional bandwidth to process it. I walked past him anyway, ducking under his arm, which required a slight loss of dignity I was willing to absorb. He fell into step behind me. This was apparently the compromise. There were approximately 30 people on the lockdown floor. Bodyguards, house staff, business associates. 2 visiting representatives from a family whose name I had learned to recognize from overheard conversations. Soren's personal staff, including Holden, my assistant, who was standing near the east window with his arms crossed and his face arranged into an expression I recognized as controlled anxiety. I had known Holden for 4 years. He had a tell. When he was afraid, he pressed his thumbnail against the inside of his first finger. Repeatedly, like a rhythm. He was doing it now. I filed that away. The missing bodyguard's locker room was 2 corridors north. Kellen stayed 3 paces behind me, which in Kellen's lexicon meant he had accepted this excursion while maintaining formal objection to it. I could work with formal objection. The locker was already processed by security. Yellow markers on the floor. The door stood open, Interior wiped clean in a way that was not how someone leaves a locker when they grab their belongings in a hurry. This was deliberate removal. Every surface clean. I reached into the locker before Kellen could stop me. My hand found the back corner seam where the metal had been bent slightly inward, probably from years of use, and in that bent seam there was a scrap of material that security had missed because they were looking for large objects. A strip of fabric. Dark. Soaked faintly. I pressed my fingers to it. The psychometry activated like a door being kicked inward. 2 men. Low voices. The bodyguard, whose name was Marco according to his nameplate 3 feet from my hand, standing with his shoulders angled toward an exit. The second figure was blurred at the edges the way figures become when a vision is contaminated by multiple handlers, but the conversation came through clean. A hand extending. An envelope. Marco taking it slowly, then less slowly. Then something I was not expecting. A scent, bleeding through the emotional residue of the vision. Scent imprints strongly in psychometric visions when the emotional charge of a moment is high enough. This one carried cedar. Burnt sugar underneath. Both. That combination lived in exactly one place in my life. The Vare household. I had smelled it on every surface of every room in the estate for 3 years. I dropped the fabric. Kellen was beside me immediately, hand on my shoulder, steadying. How bad? I'm fine. Your nose is bleeding. I touched my upper lip. He was correct. I tilted my head back and pressed my sleeve to it and breathed through my mouth until the tremor in my hands settled to something manageable. Someone inside this building paid Marco to leave, I said. Kellen's jaw moved. The scent in the vision, I said, watching him carefully, was cedar and burnt sugar. He went very still in the particular way that Kellen reserved for information that cost him something. Not surprise. Kellen was almost never surprised. Cost. Like the information required him to pay something just to receive it. He didn't answer me, which was its own answer. I walked back to the main area. Ronan was at the security console when I returned. I picked up a shattered phone from the evidence table without asking and held it in both hands before anyone could object. The vision came fast and clean because the phone's emotional imprint was recent and singular. Tavrik. 3 nights ago. A restaurant booth, private. Across from a man I recognized from photographs in Ronan's files. A senior representative of the Mancini family, which was not an organization the Vares had any documented alliance with. The man's expression was hard and specific. He leaned forward across the table. If your brothers find out what you've been doing, he said, you're finished. Vision ended. I set the phone down. Tavrik was standing 12 feet away, watching me with an expression I could not read, which was unusual because I could read Tavrik under almost all conditions. He was the transparent one. He performed opacity but never quite achieved it. He was achieving it right now. You want to tell me about the Mancini meeting? I said. Every head in the room turned. Tavrik did not flinch. But his smile, the one that lived independently of the rest of his face, disappeared completely for the first time since I had known him. An alarm screamed through the corridor system. One camera somewhere below us flickered back online. Marco appeared on the screen. On the floor. Alive, but barely. His body angled toward the camera with the deliberateness of someone who wanted to be found in exactly this position. Written in dark red beside him on the concrete. He already touched it. Chapter 4. Everyone in the room looked at me. Not at the screen. Not at the message. At me. 30 people recalibrated their threat assessment simultaneously and landed on the smallest person in the room, which was, as it had always been in my experience, exactly where nobody expected the problem to be located. Ronan crossed the floor in 6 steps. Where is the cufflink? Not a question. Not even close to a question. The words had the shape of a question and the weight of a court order. That is a fascinating thing to say to someone you've been married to for 3 years, I said. Not are you safe, not are you hurt, just immediate interrogation. Truly, the romance has never been more alive. Soren, Ronan, the cufflink. I looked at him for a long moment. He was doing the management thing again, the composure laid over the fear, but the fear was winning by a larger margin than I had ever seen it win before. His jaw was tight. His eyes were fixed on mine with an intensity that would have, in a different context, felt like the most attention anyone had ever paid me. "I know you recognize it," I said. His expression confirmed it before he could stop it. "So you're going to stop asking me where it is?" I continued. "And you're going to start explaining to me what the message on that floor means." Because he already touched IT has exactly one interpretation, and that interpretation involves my ability, and I would very much like to know how an unconscious bodyguard and a potential assassin both know about something that I have spent 3 years keeping out of any record, conversation, or document connected to this family. Ronan said nothing. Kellen appeared at my left shoulder. Tavrik had not moved from his position across the room. "Soren," Ronan said finally, "give me the cufflink. Give me an explanation. After." "No. Now." Or I walk to that broken phone on the evidence table and I hold it until I understand exactly what the Mancini family said to your brother. And then I find 12 more objects in this building and I don't stop until the nosebleed becomes something worse, and you can stand there and manage your face all you want while I do it. That landed. I watched it land in the exact sequence it traveled through him. The logic of the threat, the recognition of my capability, and then, underneath both of those, something that looked almost like grief. "Tell me what you saw," he said. I told him. All of it. The concrete floor. The chains. The young Omega pressed against the support column. Kellen with the gun. Ronan on the phone ordering cleanup. Tavrik saying my name in the context of permanent ignorance. I delivered every detail the way my attorney had taught me to deliver testimony, with precision and without editorializing, and I watched all 3 of them absorb it in real time. Kellen looked at the floor. That was the detail that broke my working theory open. Not guilt. Devastation, which is a different architecture entirely. The cufflink was in my jacket pocket. I had kept it because I intended to use it as evidence. I pulled it out and held it up. "Touch it again," Kellen said. "Kellen," Ronan started. "She needs to see the rest." Ronan turned on him. "It puts him in physical distress." "He already saw half of it," Kellen said. "Half is worse." I closed my hand around the cufflink before anyone could argue further. The vision returned to the same warehouse but began earlier. The Omega was still chained, still terrified, but I could now see the full frame. For other men were on the floor, not moving. The chemical smell was stronger. 2 VAR security operatives were moving through the space with focused efficiency. Kellen raised his weapon. He aimed at the chain. Not at the Omega, at the industrial lock on the chain, which was secured around a ceiling fixture. He fired once. The chain fell. The Omega collapsed forward, and Kellen caught him with one arm and kept him upright with the same hand that had held the gun. Ronan's voice on the phone. "Clean up before federal access. Everything that connects back to the network." Then Tavrik's full sentence, which I had heard incomplete, which I had used to build an entire catastrophe of misinterpretation. "Soren can never know about this, because the money funding this entire operation traces back to his family." Vision ended. I stood in the middle of the floor with a nosebleed and 3 husbands watching me understand, piece by piece, that I had walked into a divorce meeting carrying evidence of a rescue. I was quiet for longer than I have ever been quiet in my adult life. Then, "You've been dismantling a trafficking network." Ronan said nothing. Kellen shot the lock. Kellen's throat moved. "And my family's money is in the transactions." Tavrik said, "Soren, my family funded it." I was not asking. The vision had been clear. The documents I had photographed were suddenly rearranging themselves in my memory into a different shape entirely. Ronan's voice came from very far away. "We were going to tell you." "When?" He didn't answer. "After what event, specifically? Were you planning to tell me that the organization my husbands have been secretly dismantling for years appears to be connected to my father?" Tavrik started toward me. I held up one hand. "Don't." He stopped. The emotion behind my sternum was not grief yet. It was the specific clarity that arrives before grief, the moment when everything you believed rearranges into something colder and more precise. Holden appeared in my peripheral vision, near the east window. his thumbnail pressed against the inside of his first finger.
Obidza, obidza, obidza.
There's one more thing, I said. I walked to the evidence table. I picked up a necklace I had noticed earlier, small gold chain, a pendant in the shape of a crescent. I recognized it immediately. Holden wore it every day. I closed my fist around it. The vision came immediately. Holden's hands. An envelope, thick, photographs inside. One photograph, my face, my weekly schedule printed beneath it. A second hand passing the envelope across a surface. I could not see the second person's face, but I could see Holden taking it and nodding. Chapter 5. I set the necklace down on the table without turning around. For years, that was the number I kept landing on. 4 years of coffee orders and medication schedules and Thursday afternoon check-ins where Holden sat across from me and asked how I was doing and actually waited for the answer. 4 years of someone knowing every part of my life in the particular way that assistants do, which is more completely than most people know their own relatives. 4 years. And photographs of my face in an envelope passed across a table. I turned around. Holden, I said. He looked at me. His thumbnail stopped pressing. That was how I knew he understood exactly what had just happened. A man with a clean conscience does not stop breathing when his employer says his name from across a room. Ronan moved before I could speak again. Hold him, he said to the nearest operative. No, I said. Ronan stopped. I get the first question, I said. That's not negotiable. Not a discussion. I get the first question, and everyone in this room stays where they are until I finish. Ronan looked at me for a moment in which I could see him calculate the probability of arguing successfully against me on this particular point. He had 3 years of evidence available to inform that calculation. He stepped back. I walked across the room. Holden was standing near the window with his arms still crossed and his face doing something terrible. Not defiance. I could have handled defiance. It was the opposite of defiance. His face was doing the thing that faces do when someone has been holding a weight for so long that being seen holding it is almost a relief. I stopped in front of him. The necklace, I said. He closed his eyes. I held it, I said. I saw the envelope. I saw the photographs. I saw my schedule. Holden's arms dropped to his sides. Tell me why, I said. Not what. Why? He opened his eyes. They were red at the inner corners, which I had not noticed from across the room. Soren. Holden.
I'm sorry.
His voice cracked through the middle of the second word. I'm so sorry. I tried to find another way. I tried for 2 months to find another way and there wasn't one. Keep going. My brother. He stopped. Started again. Micah. He was taken 3 months ago. They sent me photographs every time I didn't follow instructions. They said if I contacted anyone, if I went to the Veyers, if I told you. He stopped again. His hand came up to cover his mouth and he held it there for a moment. They sent me a photograph last week. His wrist. He did not describe what was wrong with the wrist. He didn't need to. Every location I passed to them, he said. Every schedule, every security protocol I disrupted, they told me it was keeping him alive. And I believed them. I had to believe them. The room was completely silent. I understood the silence. I also understood what was building inside it, specifically from the direction of Ronan, who had a particular relationship with betrayal that expressed itself through very quiet, very permanent decisions. I turned to face him before he could speak. He was coerced, I said. He leaked your location to someone carrying a rifle, someone who had his 19-year-old brother, I said, and a photograph of the boy's wrist. Ronan's expression did not change. Ronan's expressions rarely changed, but his hands, which were clasped behind his back, adjusted. One thumb pressed into the opposite palm. I had learned to read Ronan in the architecture of his hands. That particular movement meant he was in a fight with himself. Soren, Tavrik said carefully. Even if everything he's saying is true, it is, I said. I saw the vision. The second person's face was blurred, but the transfer was real. He was taking instructions, not giving them. I looked back at Holden. You said you tried for 2 months. You said you couldn't contact the Vares. But you're standing in a room with them right now, which means someone told you not to come to them specifically. Who gave you the instructions? Holden's expression shifted into something harder to read. A handler. I never saw his face. Voice calls only. Did he know about my ability? Holden paused. Yes. He said you couldn't be allowed to touch certain objects. He knew specifically what your ability did. He knew its limitations. His eyes moved briefly to the cufflink on the table. He said if you ever touched the wrong thing, his entire operation would surface. The room temperature seemed to drop 2 degrees. I looked at the 3 alphas in sequence. Ronan, whose face had gone very still. Tavrik, whose performance of calm had developed a fault line along his left eye. Kellen, who had been watching Holden with an expression that was working its way slowly from threat assessment toward something more complicated. The assassination order isn't about the marriage, I said. It's not about being your Omega or accessing your empire. Whoever sent someone into this building with a rifle did it because I touched an object connected to the trafficking network and they can't afford what I might eventually see. Kellen said, "We know." I turned to him. "How long have you known?" He did not answer immediately. "Kellen, we've known someone with your ability was on their threat list," he said. "Since the beginning of this year. I absorbed that. And you didn't tell me. We were trying to. Don't say protect me." He stopped. "Because if the next word out of your mouth is protect, I am going to say something that I will not apologize for, and then I am going to walk to that evidence table and start touching every object on it until I understand exactly how long you have been managing my life like a problem to be solved." I breathed through my nose. "I told you 5 chapters ago that the divorce still stands. It still stands." The lights died. Gunshots. 3. Close. Holden dropped to the floor without being told to. Kellen was already moving toward the door when the emergency ventilation system kicked on, and with it came something that made my eyes water and every alpha in the room go rigid. Scent suppressant. Industrial grade. Fed directly into the airflow. Tavrik turned toward the vent panel. "He's in the building," Ronan said. "Holden." From the floor, barely audible. "He found us." Chapter 6. Kellen moved left. I moved right. Not because anyone told me to, because standing still inside a sealed building with a man who had just pumped scent suppressant through the ventilation system was not a survivable strategy, and I had spent enough time around these 3 to understand that when the air changes, you move. The suppressant burned. Not painfully, but insistently, the way cold water does when it fills your ears. Every alpha on the floor was affected. I watched Ronan's head come up sharply, his tracking disrupted, his instincts suddenly operating without their primary instrument. Tavrik pressed 2 fingers against his temple. Kellen blinked twice, which for Kellen was the equivalent of staggering. The assassin knew exactly what he was doing. Ronan redistributed his team in under 30 seconds, which I noted with the distant admiration of someone watching a person perform under conditions designed specifically to break them. Half moved to the north corridor. Half sealed the interior rooms. Tavrik disappeared through the service access behind the kitchen block. Kellen stayed with me. "I need you to move to the interior room," he said. "I need you to stop saying things you already know won't work," I said. He looked at me. There was blood drying on his left forearm from a cut I hadn't seen happen. He was completely unbothered by it. We moved together through the east corridor. Kellen first, hand on the wall, checking door frames. Me 1 step behind, which was not my preference but was the only configuration that allowed us to move at any useful speed without him physically restraining me every 4 feet. The first shot came from our left. It hit the wall above my head. Kellen was in front of me before the sound finished. He caught the follow-up angle and returned fire through a doorway with the economy of motion that comes from doing something thousands of times. The attacker retreated. Kellen turned to check me, and that single second of divided attention was the one the assassin had been manufacturing. He came from the ceiling access. The impact drove Kellen sideways into the corridor wall. His weapon hit the floor. The assassin was fast and disciplined, moving with the specific efficiency of someone who had been paid significant money to end a single life and had planned every step of the approach. He ignored Kellen, who was already pushing off the wall. He came directly at me. I dropped to the floor and grabbed Kellen's weapon. I am not a marksman. I want to be clear about that. I have never been trained in firearms, and I have no intention of developing the skill set under normal conditions. These were not normal conditions. I grabbed the weapon, rolled left, and pressed my back against the baseboard. The assassin adjusted his angle. I threw the weapon sideways down the corridor. He tracked it for exactly 1 second by instinct. Kellen hit him from behind. The fight was brief and consequential. Kellen drove him into the floor with a force that transmitted through the floorboards. The assassin was good. Kellen was better. What ended it was not technique, but the specific fury of a man who has just watched someone he loves get shot at twice in 4 minutes. I crawled to the weapon on the floor. My hand closed around the grip, and the psychometric detonated behind my eyes like a camera flash in a dark room. The assassin, earlier, moving through a maintenance level below the penthouse floor, crouching beside a red pipe adjacent to the emergency generator housing. His hands placing something flat and rectangular against the pipe fitting, adhering it, pressing a small panel on its surface. Timer, already running. Second fragment. The corridor leading to that maintenance level. A yellow service door. The number stenciled above it in black paint. Sublevel 3. I dropped the weapon. There's a bomb, I said. My voice came out steadier than I deserved. Sublevel 3. Red pipe beside the emergency generator. It's already on a timer. I pressed my sleeve to my nose. The gunfight is the distraction. He doesn't need to kill me directly. He collapses this floor and I'm collateral damage in a building accident. Kellen stared at me for 1 full second. We need to move, I said. I need you to go to the interior room. Kellen Vare, if you finish that sentence, I will divorce all 3 of you a second time before the ink dries on the first filing. I was already moving toward the service stairwell at the corridor's end. The emergency lock had disengaged when the assassin used it for access. I know where it is. You don't. Those are the terms. He came with me. Sublevel 3 was cold and smelled of concrete and electrical current. We found the red pipe in 40 seconds. The device was exactly where the vision had shown it, flat against the pipe fitting, timer display facing outward. 41 seconds remaining. Kellen looked at it. I need 30 seconds and no talking. You have 41. You're fine. He worked. I stood behind him and watched his hands move with complete focus and no wasted motion. At 11 seconds, he removed the primary connection. At 7 seconds, he separated the secondary. The timer stopped at 6. He sat back on his heels. I sat down on the concrete floor next to him because my legs had reached their opinion about the last several minutes. His hand found mine in the dark without either of us deciding it. His fingers closed around my hand with a pressure that was not possessive and not performative. It was the specific grip of someone making sure a thing they cannot afford to lose is still present. We sat there for 4 seconds. Then his radio fired. Tavrick's voice. North corridor. Now, we have him. Kellen pulled me to my feet. We ran. Tavrick had the assassin against the wall when we arrived. Arm locked, breathing hard. Ronan stood 3 feet away. The assassin's mask was gone. His face was mid-40s, unremarkable, with a scar along the left jaw that curved toward his ear. Holden stepped out from behind Ronan. He saw the man's face. All color left Holden's. That's not possible, Holden said. He's been dead for 5 years. Chapter 7. Holden's voice had gone somewhere airless and thin, the kind of voice a person produces when the ground they were standing on turns out to be a photograph of ground. The assassin looked at Holden with no particular reaction. Not recognition, not contempt, nothing. The total indifference of a man who had filed Holden somewhere in his operational memory and considered him resolved. He was declared dead, Holden said, to no one specifically. There was a funeral. Micah and I went to the funeral. Ronan's eyes moved to me. I gave him the smallest headshake I could manage, which meant not yet, which meant let it develop, which meant I have a theory and I need 40 more seconds. The assassin's eyes moved to me. Your father, he said. Should have handled this before your gift was old enough to matter. The room did a slow tilt. I kept my face exactly where it was. Everyone in the room was now watching me. Tavrek's grip on the assassin's arm tightened by 1 degree. Kellen stepped to my right. Ronan said nothing, which was Ronan's version of holding his breath. My father, I said, is a man I haven't spoken to in 6 years. Whatever you've been told about his involvement in your operational chain, I'd like you to understand that you have been used as a very expensive instrument by someone who needed you to point in a specific direction. The assassin said nothing. I turned to Ronan. Get the evidence files. The ones from the filing cabinet. All of them. He sent 2 operatives. They returned in 4 minutes. I spread the contents on the nearest flat surface, which was a security console, and went through them with the specific attention of someone who had already been wrong once today about what they were seeing and had no interest in being wrong again. The photographs, the payment records, the shell company documentation, and at the bottom of the stack, a personal signet ring in a sealed evidence bag, recovered from the assassin during the initial detainment. I had been told it belonged to my father. Gold. Distinctive engraving on the face. I had seen that ring on my father's hand throughout my entire childhood. I picked up the bag. I held it in both palms and waited. Nothing. Not a fragment. Not an impression. Not the faint residual warmth that objects carry when they have been worn close to skin for years. An object worn every day for 2 decades carries the emotional weight of a person's entire adult life. I should have been overwhelmed. There was nothing. I set it down. It's a replica, I said. Ronan went very still. My father wore that ring from the time I was 4 years old until the last time I saw him. If this were genuine, I would have seen 20 years of his life the moment I touched it. There is nothing in this object. I looked at the evidence spread across the console. Someone manufactured this. Someone who knew what the ring looked like. Someone who had access to detailed information about my father's history, my childhood, my ability, and this investigation. I looked at the assassin. Someone who needed my father to be the answer before I touched enough objects to find the real one. Ronan said, "Who has that level of access?" "Someone close," I said. "Someone who was present from the beginning." Tavrek released the assassin to the operatives and walked toward me slowly. "Soren, if it's not your father at the top, it's someone who knows my father well enough to copy his ring," I said. "Someone who knows this operation well enough to manufacture evidence within it. Someone who has been present long enough to understand exactly how my ability works and exactly which objects to keep away from me." The room was quiet for a moment that felt architectural. Ronan's voice came out low and careful. "Your father's brother." I looked at him. "We flagged him 18 months ago," Ronan said, "as a possibility, not a certainty. He'd been declared dead, same as the assassin. We couldn't place him inside any active network." "You flagged him," I said, 18 months ago. "Soren, and you didn't tell me that someone potentially connected to my family was a threat to me." His jaw moved. "We weren't certain." "You weren't certain," I repeated. The words were very flat. "You were not certain, so you decided not to share the information with the person most directly at risk, because you were managing what I was allowed to know, and that decision, Ronan, is the entire marriage problem in one sentence." He did not argue. He couldn't. The operatives took the assassin to a secured room. We moved back to the main area. I sat on the edge of a console and breathed for a moment and let the timeline settle into its correct shape in my mind. My uncle declared dead. An assassin also declared dead. My father's identity used as a decoy. The cufflink, which had belonged to someone who had been at the warehouse during the trafficking operation. Someone on the rescue side. Someone the Vares trusted enough to invite into that space. My uncle, who knew my father well enough to wear his ring's copy. My uncle, who had known about my ability since it manifested. My uncle, who had not wanted me to touch the wrong object. And then I remembered what Holden had said, in the corridor before the lights went out, that he had been contacted by a handler whose voice he never heard clearly, that the handler knew exactly what my ability did, that the handler had said one specific thing. If he ever touches the wrong thing, the entire operation surfaces. Not they. The handler had known my designation since the beginning. I looked at Ronan. I need to find my uncle, I said, before he understands that his assassin failed. Chapter 8. They found Micah in a converted utility building 40 minutes outside the city. I was not present for the extraction. This was the one concession I made without argument, because I understood the difference between being strong enough to insist on my own presence and being strategic enough to know when my presence would slow something down. Kellen led the team. Tavrik coordinated the secondary approach from the north entry. Ronan stayed with me at the tower, which I initially interpreted as him assigning himself babysitting duty until I understood it differently. He stayed because he did not trust anyone else with me in the building. Not his operatives. Not the secured floor. Him. Personally. I sat in the conference room where this had all started, with the 3 divorce envelopes still on the table, and Ronan stood at the window watching the city with his hands clasped behind his back, and we existed in the same silence for 11 minutes before either of us spoke. He said, "I owe you an honest conversation." "You owe me several," I said. "Yes." He turned from the window. "I'll start with the one I've been avoiding the longest." He crossed the room and sat down across from me, which was unusual. Ronan conducted difficult conversations on his feet, standing because height and distance were tools he used without thinking. Sitting across from me at the same level was a deliberate choice, and I registered it. "When we married you," he said, "I believed that keeping you safe meant keeping you separate from anything dangerous. I built a wall around your daily life and called it protection, and I told myself it was love." He stopped. "It was love. That's what I keep having to reconcile. Both things are true. I loved you and I built a cage, and I called it by the wrong name for 3 years. Ronan, I'm not finished." I closed my mouth. "The trafficking network. Your uncle. The cufflink. We should have told you all of it the moment your name appeared in any document connected to the investigation. We didn't. And the reason we didn't was not strategy. It was fear. We were terrified that if you understood how close the danger was, you would leave. And we could not hold the possibility of losing you and function simultaneously." He looked at his hands on the table. "So we chose control over honesty. And I have been aware for approximately 8 months that it was the wrong choice, and I made it anyway." The room was very quiet. "That," I said, "is the most honest thing you've ever said to me. I know. I need you to understand something in return." I waited until he looked up. "I was not leaving because I stopped loving you. I was leaving because loving someone inside a silence they build around you is one of the loneliest things a person can experience. I felt like a beautifully maintained secret. Not a partner. A secret." Something in his face cracked open in a way I had never seen before on this man. In 3 years, across every argument and every quiet evening and every moment I had catalogued and carried, Tavrik came back first. He appeared in the doorway, and behind him, Kellen, and between them a slight figure wrapped in a thermal blanket who could only be Micah, 19 years old, alive, with Holden's exact eye color and his hands clutching the blanket's edge with both fists. Holden crossed the room at a speed that was not running but was the fastest a person can move while still technically maintaining composure. He reached his brother and stopped, and they stood there with their foreheads pressed together not saying anything, and I looked away because some things are not meant to have an audience. Tavrik dropped into the chair beside me. He was silent for a moment, which was so unusual that I checked him for injury on instinct. "I use humor," he said quietly, "because I don't know how to stay in a serious moment without it becoming something I can't control." He looked at his hands. "With you specifically. You make me feel things that I don't have a management system for, so I make you laugh instead." And I told myself that was enough. He looked up. "It wasn't enough." "No," I agreed. "It wasn't." Kellen sat on my other side. He said nothing for a long time. Then, "There was someone I failed to protect before you. Years ago. Someone who trusted me and I wasn't fast enough." He stopped. "After that, I started treating everyone I loved like a problem I was solving instead of a person I was standing next to. I put that on you. That wasn't yours to carry." I looked at all three of them in the specific sequence I had developed over 3 years. Ronan, Tavrik, Kellen. My chest hurt in the way it does when something you've been protecting finally lets itself be seen. I still love all three of you, I said. That's the part I've been furious about. It would be significantly easier if I didn't. Ronan said, Does that change the divorce? Not yet. Tavrik made a sound of pure suffering. But, I leaned forward. You asked for an honest conversation. I'm having one. That's new. We're doing things differently now. Ronan looked at me across the table. He asked, May I? Not a statement, an actual question. I said yes. He crossed to my side of the table and cupped my face in both hands with the specific care of a man holding something he had come very close to losing. The kiss began like an apology and ended like a promise, and somewhere in the middle it became 3 years of everything neither of us had said out loud. Tavrik started to say something. Kellen put a hand on his shoulder. Tavrik closed his mouth. When we separated, I picked up the evidence folder from the table. One photograph remained unexamined. I pulled it out. My uncle, as expected. But the man across from him in the image, partially turned away, visible only in profile. I knew that profile. I knew the way that man held his shoulders. The particular angle of his jaw. I had known it since I was 4 years old. Chapter 9. I set the photograph on the table face up and said nothing. Ronan saw my expression first. He looked down at the photograph. Then he looked at me. He did not ask what was wrong, because Ronan had spent 3 years learning to read my silences the way cartographers read coastlines, every variation significant, every stillness its own specific shape. Tell me, he said. The man with my uncle, I said. The one in profile. Ronan studied the photograph. We couldn't identify him from the angle. I can, I said. That's my father. The silence that followed was the kind that doesn't have a duration because nobody in it is tracking time. Tavrik stood up very slowly. Kellen crossed to the table and looked at the photograph for a long time before he said anything. Soren, you're certain? I have looked at that profile across a dinner table for the first 11 years of my life, I said. I am completely certain. Here is what I expected to feel in that moment. Betrayal. The clean, specific fury of discovering that the man I had spent 6 years grieving, the man I had constructed elaborate private narratives about, the man I had told myself had left because he was afraid and not because he was complicit, had been sitting across from the architect of a trafficking network in a restaurant booth and had apparently been doing so voluntarily. What I actually felt was stranger than that. It was the sensation of a story I had told myself for 6 years dissolving in real time, not all at once but layer by layer, like something submerged in water, the shape changing before the whole thing disappears. Ronan said, We need to verify before we act on this. I know. Soren, this could still be manufactured evidence. Your uncle has already demonstrated the willingness to frame your father. I know, I said again, which is why I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm telling you what I see. There's a difference. I learned that today. Something shifted in Ronan's expression. I think it was the closest he was capable of coming to pride without having the word available to him. They ran the image through 3 separate analysis systems over the next 2 hours. I sat with Micah while they worked, not because I was assigned to him, but because he was 19 years old and shaking slightly and had the look of someone who had just been handed back their life and didn't yet know what to do with the weight of it. We didn't talk much. I brought him food from the kitchen, which he ate with the focused intensity of someone who had not been eating adequately. I sat beside him and let him exist without performance, which I suspected was what he needed more than conversation. Holden watched from across the room. At one point our eyes met and he said nothing and I said nothing, and that was a complete exchange. The analysis came back at 2 in the morning. The man in the photograph was my father. The timestamp on the image was 14 months ago. 3 months before my uncle was confirmed operational within the trafficking network. Which meant my father had been in contact with his supposedly dead brother for at least 14 months before any attack on me was ordered. Which meant he had known. Which meant 6 years of silence was not grief or fear. It was operational distance. Ronan delivered this information to me with both hands on the table and his eyes steady on mine, because he had finally, actually learned something about how to be in a room with me. He told me everything. He did not manage the delivery. He did not soften the sequence of facts. He simply laid it in front of me and waited. I sat with it for 3 minutes. Then I said, "Where is he?" "We don't know yet," Ronan said. "We have people looking. My uncle, also moving. He'll know the assassination failed within hours if he doesn't already." Tavrik said, from across the room, "We've already compromised the network's primary distribution chain. The trafficking operation has no functional infrastructure left. The victims in the 3 identified holding locations were extracted by federal contacts 2 hours ago." He paused. 41 people. 41. I pressed my thumb against the table edge and held it there. "Micah's location was the 4th site," Kellen said, "which is why we moved on it separately." I nodded. The uncle had escaped before any team reached him. My father's location remained unknown. The assassin was in a secured room 2 floors below us, breathing and uncooperative. The network was dismantled. The evidence was real. The people it had processed were no longer where they had been. None of that resolved the fact that the man who raised me had known. Ronan sat down beside me. Not across. Beside. "You don't have to decide anything about your father tonight. I know. We'll find him. I know that too. What do you need right now?" I looked at him. Then at Tavrik, who had stopped performing everything and was just sitting in his own gravity for once, looking older and more real than the version of him I usually interacted with. Then at Kellen, who had positioned himself near the window where he could see both the door and me simultaneously, which was not surveillance. It was the specific attention of someone who had finally understood that watching over a person and standing beside them were not the same action. "I need to sleep," I said. "And when I wake up, I need all 3 of you to still be exactly this honest." Weeks passed before I returned to our shared room. Not days. Weeks, because I had promised myself that choosing them again would be a choice and not a consequence of proximity or fear or the particular vulnerability of having been almost killed. When I walked back through that door, it was because I wanted to. Chapter 10. The recommitment was Ronan's idea, which surprised me, because Ronan's approach to symbolic gestures was historically one of profound skepticism. He came to me on a Thursday morning, which was ordinary in every external way. Coffee on the kitchen counter. Kellen's weights clanking somewhere below us. Tavrik apparently arguing with someone on the phone in a language he switched to specifically when he didn't want me to follow the conversation. Ronan sat across from me at the kitchen island and placed a folded piece of paper between us. "I'd like to do this again," he said. I looked at the paper. "You've written vows." "I've written conditions," he said. "There's a difference." I picked up the paper. It was dense and precise, which was fully Ronan. 3 columns. 1 for each of them. I read slowly, the way I read anything that mattered. Ronan's column. "No more deciding what Soren is allowed to know based on what I believe will harm him. Truth is not a resource to be rationed. His access to it is not mine to manage." Tavrik's column. "No more converting serious moments into performances. When something needs to be said directly, I say it directly. Humor is a tool, not a hiding place." Kellen's column. "No more treating protection as ownership. Soren's ability to make decisions inside dangerous situations is not a problem to be solved. It is part of who he is. Standing beside him means standing beside all of it." I read all 3 columns twice. There was a 4th column. It was blank, with my name at the top. "We thought," Ronan said carefully, "that you might want to write your own." I sat with the blank column for a long moment. Then I picked up the pen he had placed beside the paper without announcing it, because Ronan's consideration often operated in exactly that register, present without commentary. I wrote, "I will stop treating independence as a reason to carry fear alone. I will say when something is too heavy. I will trust that choosing you is not the same as losing myself." I set the pen down. I pulled a document from my jacket pocket. I had prepared it 4 days earlier with my attorney, in the same office where I had prepared the original divorce filings. I slid it across the island toward Ronan. He looked at it. "New marriage agreement," I said. "Properly drafted." My terms included this time. Kellen appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at the document on the counter and then at me, and something in his face went very quiet and very warm simultaneously. Tavrik ended his phone call in the middle of a sentence and walked into the kitchen. He saw the document. Then he looked at me with an expression that was completely unperformed, which was the rarest version of Tavrik Vare and the one I had spent 3 years trying to find underneath everything else. So technically, he said, you're marrying us for the second time. Technically, I said, I'm marrying you for the first time correctly. Tavrik sat down heavily. I feel like there should be a loyalty program. Points. A commemorative card. I'll look into it, I said. Ronan signed first, then Kellen. Tavrik signed last, with his usual theatrical flair, and added a small annotation in the margin that I would discover 3 days later was a list of acceptable date locations, ranked by his personal preference. That evening was quieter than the weeks before it. The 4 of us ate dinner at the table like people who had survived something and were learning to sit still inside the aftermath. Micah had been transferred to a medical facility for proper evaluation, and Holden had gone with him, and I had told Holden before he left that his position was his when he was ready to return, no conditions, no performance review. He had not expected that. I had not expected to mean it as completely as I did. After dinner, I sat in the main room while the 3 of them existed around me in their separate rhythms. Ronan reading. Kellen at the window. Tavrik on the phone again. Quieter this time. On the coffee table, in the evidence bag where it had been sitting for 2 weeks, was the assassin's wedding ring. I had not touched it. Everyone had assumed the case was resolved. My uncle in flight. My father's location unknown but his involvement confirmed. The network dismantled. The assassin captured. I had not touched the ring because I was afraid of what it would show me. That is the honest reason. I had been afraid and I had made the choice to protect myself, and for 2 weeks I had decided that was acceptable. But I had also, very recently, written on a piece of paper that I would not carry fear alone. I picked up the evidence bag. I opened it. I took the ring out and held it in my closed palm and waited. The vision arrived softly, which was the cruelest version. Not a jolt. A slow unfolding. A restaurant. Booths. Low light. The assassin, months before this, sitting across a table with both hands flat on the surface, listening. I could not see the other person immediately. The vision built from detail outward the way they always did. Hands first, then a jacket sleeve, then the angle of a shoulder, then the face turned. My breath left my body. Ronan looked up from his book. He saw my face. He set the book down and crossed the room in 5 steps and crouched in front of me. Soren. The ring was still in my palm. Soren, he said again. Who? The man in the vision had not been my uncle. My uncle had been receiving instructions, the same as the assassin, the same as Holden, the same as every instrument in this chain. Someone above my uncle. Someone who had built the entire architecture and placed my uncle inside it as a visible face. Someone I knew. Someone I had known before I knew the Vares. Someone whose hands I had seen at a dinner table for the first 11 years of my life and whose face I had spent 6 years telling myself I missed. I set the ring down. Ronan was very close. His hands were on my knees. His eyes were steady on mine. It wasn't my uncle, I said. He waited. My father, I said, was not the man who was framed. The room was completely still. He was the one doing the framing. Life teaches you that love and harm are not opposites. Sometimes the people who shaped you are also the ones who endangered you. Sometimes protection is the costume that control wears. Sometimes the truth does not arrive as a single revelation but as a series of smaller doors, each one opening into a room you were not prepared to enter. You cannot love someone into honesty. You can only decide when the truth finally arrives who you want to be standing next to. I looked at Ronan, then at Kellen, who had crossed the room without sound, then at Tavrik, who had ended his call and was watching me with his phone still in his hand and every performance completely gone. 3 men who had failed me and said so. 3 men who had written it down and signed it. 3 men who were still in the room. I had chosen them again because choosing is not a single act. It is a practice. The same way honesty is a practice. The same way trust is built not in the large moments but in every small, unremarkable moment after the large ones are finished. My father was still out there. We would find him. But tonight, inside this room, with the evidence bag on the table and the new marriage contract signed and Tavrik pretending he was not blinking faster than usual, I understood something I wanted to pass forward. Being loved is not the same as being seen. Being protected is not the same as being trusted. And real love, the kind that costs something and survives the cost, is never the absence of difficulty. It is the decision to remain honest inside it. That is the only version worth choosing. If this story reached something inside you, if Soren's journey felt like something you recognized, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that is built to matter. Every episode here is written to entertain you and leave you with something real. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us what you felt, what hit differently, what you want to see next. Your voice in this space inspires the next story and the one after that. We will see you there. The end.